many steps it was to the kitchen to get whatever Mrs. Schwartz or Mrs. Glick wanted. There's a famous story that Mousy Lawrence tells about the food. The person who's ordered dinner, all 8 people ordered, and then Mrs. Glick would say, bring one more for the table. And whatever it was, an extra roast beef or an extra steak or what have you. So there were literally as much as all you could eat before it was in vogue in any other restaurant. Mousy Lawrence also tells a story about the lady leaving with the Danish wrapped up in a napkin in her pocketbook. The waiter says, where are you going, Mrs. Schwartz? She says, these are not for now, these are for later. And basically you were able to take stuff for to your room if you wanted to snack on stuff later. Crazy stuff happened in the dining room. In my case, I learned a lot by following my cousins who worked there before me. One of the things you learned is never take any food off someone else's server. You would be in very, very serious trouble. You come out with food, you think you've counted, you turn around, a waiter from another station says, I'm 1 short on my roast beef, and you slip it out and you put it on the table. He comes back with a knife in his hand sometimes. Don't ever touch my server, never. All this is happening while my grandfather, Abe Scheck, God bless him, was watching, and a maitre d', of course, was watching to make sure. My granddad stood at the door. People would want to leave a little early when the racetrack opened. He stood there and he said to them, where are you going? They said, we're making the Daily Double. He said, no, you're not. I paid for entertainment tonight in the Copa nightclub and you're not leaving. And they would say, we love you, but we're going. He was very unhappy about it. What was the pay? How do we make money? We got a check, as my recollection, $18.34 every 2 weeks. That was after they took out taxes and room and board. Yes, we had to pay for our own room and board at the hotels. And when I say room, I use the term advisedly. At our hotel, we had a place called the Shack. There were 8 guys and 1 tiny little bathroom in the back. And when it rained, there were puddles on the floor. I also tell the story of a place that I worked, the New Roxy. There were bunk beds in the back where they put the waiters and the busboys. I got in a bunk bed on the top. There was a big pipe that ran across my bed, and every time I looked up, there was drip, drip, drip. The following morning, I said to the maitre d', I have a problem in my room. There's a drip, and I need a different room. And he said, don't worry about that. That's just when somebody flushes the toilet in the hotel. It all goes through that pipe. True story. I'm not making it up. What did we learn? We learned that there are foods that people are not finding regularly in restaurants, like borscht, flanken, which of course was boiled beef, stuffed derma, gefilte fish. The hotels were virtually all kosher, dairy lunch, and a meat dinner. We had 2 extra meals on Labor Day and July 4th. We had a midnight dinner at the Delano. That meant you served 3 meals. You went out, you took a shower, and you came back in, and at 12 o'clock midnight, you served a 4th meal. And it was usually a meat meal. And we had the flaming trays that we marched around and, you know, made a big hoopla for that. So if you had on that weekend, it was fine. And I must tell you, for the most part, there were no incidents, but I can also tell you, when my granddad bought covers for the main dishes, and you've seen them at the Concord, he bought the wrong size. And the first week we used them, my cousin Michael actually walked out with the covers on his tray and they started to wobble. And they teach you the first thing to do if you're ever going to go down with a tray, fling it against the wall. Don't let it fall on any people. Fling it against the wall and be safe yourself. My cousin went down with a tray. That was it for covers. We never used covers again at the hotel. Labor Day was something we yearned for, we waited for. Oh yeah, how did we make money? We had tips. In those days, 21 meals, the average tip was $5 for a waiter and $3 for a busboy. And if you had a really good customer, you got $10 per person and $5 for a busboy. So it was very possible, if you had a sufficient number of guests, to make between $200 and $300 a week if you're a waiter. and $150 a week. And the bus boys used to get extra tips. Why? They had to wash the silverware. If you put the silverware in the kitchen, the likelihood is you're never going to get the silverware back that you had. So every busboy had to wash the silverware in these buckets with this boiling hot water. And he got paid an extra tip for taking care of the silverware and the goblets, which were washed by hand, again, in boiling hot water. It was everything we could do to work it and get ourselves to Labor Day. Sometimes guys didn't make it through the summer because it just got too crazy. But if I tell you it was frenetic, we did not miss meals. We did not miss shows. At the Delano, we had the likes of Cab Calloway and Jackie Mason and Myron Cohen and Hines and Dad, Gregory Hines, before he became a movie star. Many of the same acts that were at the other hotels. And we would, the waiters, the young guys would go from hotel to hotel looking for a good time. And I can only remember one instance where Jackie Wilson was at the late show at the Laurels, which started at 1 o'clock on a Saturday night. I know it was late because by the time the show was over and we came back to the Delano, the milkman was delivering milk. It was about 5 o'clock in the morning. And we were coming home when everybody else was still asleep and just about getting up. So that's roughly my experience working in the dining room. I'd like to ask my colleagues to share theirs, and then we can see if we can take some questions. Lynn Skolnick, you came here from another place. I used to joke with you about, the fact that, I think it was in Chicago, somebody came for a job in Chicago, and one of the aldermen in Chicago said, well, who recommended him? And then the guy said, well, nobody recommended me. And the answer was, well, we don't take nobody that nobody recommended. But you did have a recommendation for the Catskills.
Did. I wasn't just nobody. I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, and I had a national defense loan for college, which I lost for my senior year. So I knew that I needed a job that would pay some money. And in Ohio in that time, the guys worked in the steel mills. There were still steel mills then. And so the women didn't. So I needed a job. I had this uncle a great uncle who lived in New York City, got me a job. I had juice, as they say. And he got me a job at the Concord. I had never waited tables before. I probably lied and said I had waited tables because that's what we all did. And I didn't know another soul. And so when I came to the Concord and I came to the dining, there was a little employment office around the corner from the back door of the hotel. And I went there and they assigned me to the Capitol building for a place to stay. It was co-ed. Well, it was co-ed. It was all men in Lynn because I came up, my college was on trimesters. So when I got here in April, the other college kids weren't here. So there were women who worked in the hotels, a lot of the professionals, as we call them, from Pennsylvania. They were older women with families, but I was one of the few college kids in April. I used to go to the shower was down the hall. I would be fully clothed and I would put my bathrobe over my clothes so that people wouldn't think that I was fully clothed because I was afraid to death. I had never been in a co-ed situation like this. And after the season started, they opened up a place. There was a little bungalow colony down the road from the staff quarters called Gasworth's, and I lived in Gasworth's. And one night, I'll never forget this. It was probably 2 o'clock in the morning, and I awoke to someone shining a flashlight in my eyes, and it was from the employment office. They weren't checking to see that Lynn was safe in her own room. They were checking to make sure Lynn did not have any visitors in her room. They just walked into our bungalow, shined a light, and I remember the next morning going to the union person in the dining room. I was crazed. Marvin had asked me originally to talk about a woman's perspective. The truth is, when I came up here in 1968, by today's standards, I should have been appalled. Women, young women, we were leered at and ogled at, and people, every time I walked into the kitchen, people would make lewd comments. When I say people, the kitchen staff. And there's a famous story. My first year was here at the Raleigh. The second year I went down, the first year was the Concord. My second year I went down to the Raleigh. And that's where I met my future husband. And Barry and I had already started dating. And as some of you may remember, I had a week-long guest, and every morning that guest requested shirred eggs. And the breakfast chefs, they could do the omelets quickly, they could do fried quickly, they could do scrambled quickly. They hated shirred eggs. So every morning, I had to steel myself to go in and say, ordering shirred eggs. And the breakfast chef would say, really despicable things to me. And one morning, it was a Friday morning, I could not take it any longer. And I said to him, just give me my eggs, except I may have had an adjective in there before the word eggs. And without thinking, that breakfast chef took a main dish plate, there were stacks of them on the range, and threw it at me. And I didn't know that my husband, my future husband, was in the kitchen, and he saw this happening. And Barry, it was a famous story, Barry jumped up on the range and was trying to strangle the breakfast chef. And because all those vats of eggs and the dishes, everything went sliding. And I remember Manny Halbert coming out of his office, and his question was, who's going to pay for this? Not how are you okay? Nothing. But who's going to pay for these broken dishes and these lost eggs? So, yes, and by today's standard, I would never have accepted this kind of talk to me or disrespect, but I thought it came with the job. I thought it was part of the culture at the time, and I really did not think twice about it. I guess I was always a little feisty, but we accepted it. Someone asked me also, how did I even know to come to the Catskills? We got the New York Times in my house every Sunday, and my parents would take the magazine section to do the crossword puzzle, and my sisters and I would take the arts and leisure and the travel section. And in the back of the travel section was the ads for all the entertainment for the summer at the Catskills. And so it was kind of like in my DNA to think about going to the Catskills. And the first summer at the Concord I saved enough money to pay for my entire senior year of college. I saved $3,800. And that was, I had to go home in the middle of the summer because my oldest sister got married. So paying for flying home, I still saved enough, $3,800, and I paid for my entire senior year of college in 1969 at a state school in Ohio. So we made a lot of money. My husband worked in the hotels until before we got married, and he had a big station. There was a hierarchy in the dining room. We as summer folks were peons. We didn't get the best stations, and really I don't recall this in the Concord, but in the Raleigh, it was expected on Sundays when you checked the board, which was where all the seating was, to say if you had any guests who were staying on after Sunday lunch. It was typical that you tipped the maitre d' with the idea that you were going to get a good station. always one that didn't go with the flow. I refused to tip because my thought was, if everybody's tipping, someone's not going to get the best station because there's only so many good stations near the front of the dining room or wherever. And so I refused to do that. And I was in Siberia a number of times. And, you know, that was just the price I paid for my my stubbornness. The one thing I remember most about the hotel, first of all, I remember when I was first at the Concord, someone mentioned livestock, and it said, never leave anything on your table, bring all your livestock back. I was looking for cows and sheep and not understanding that it had nothing to do with that. And the other thing was, someone yelled at me once. I said I was hungry, and I said, "How you're working in a hotel? How can you be hungry?" Well, you weren't supposed to eat what the hotel guests were eating. There were staff meals, which I felt were substandard. So I refused to do that. A lot of the waiters and waitresses stole a main dish, certainly on steak knives. There was enough steaks on steak knife. They would take a couple extra steaks, put them in their server, you know, eat them later when they were ice cold, of course. But that was not something I did. The other thing that people did that I never did, Marvin mentioned the pay. I recall getting a waiter getting $5 and a busboy $3 a head on the weekend. And I kind of remember 20 and 12 for an entire week. And you would get these little envelopes, and most people would open their envelopes before the people were out of the door. And if they didn't like the tip, they would run after them to insist on more. That wasn't me. I couldn't do that. This is what you thought I deserved. This is what I accepted. But a lot of people ran after guests and demanded more. And I don't even know if they got more, but that was not something that I did. And the other thing that I just want to make sure people know, we just had a blast. We became a group of people. Every night after the dining room closed down and we had set up our station for the morning, we all went out as a group. We went to local bars. We went back to our rooms. We went to restaurants. We would go out for dinner and have a great meal. There were so many restaurants and bars in the area at that time. And sometimes we would party all night, and we would come back in for breakfast in the morning with the same uniform dress on that we had the night before, because we never got back. But we knew we could always take a nap between either breakfast and lunch, a real quick nap, or between lunch and dinner, because as Marvin said, we worked 3 meals a day. And it was a real culture shock for me as a Midwestern weed coming up to the Catskills. But we made enough money. It paid for my senior year of college, and I met a lot of longtime friends. And so it was a great experience for me, and I stayed.
Thank you, Lynn. I used to call it a power nap. If you had even 5 minutes before lunch, you ran down to the room, you slept for 5 minutes, you had somebody wake you up, and you came back because you needed to be refreshed, or you would literally fall off your feet.
You might want to ask
Barrish.
Marvin, just one other thing. When Myron speaks, you just might ask Myron about where he took some power naps.
Or maybe he shouldn't.
Okay, we'll do. Barrish, why don't you go next?
I'll talk a little bit. My parents both were in the hotels, both as waiters. My mother was one of the first waitresses at the Concord. She started working there in the 40s, so she was right when it first started. And my father came there right after the war, and he was in the staff dining room. A lot of people still know my father from the staff dining room at the Concord. He worked there from 45 to 63. The staff dining room was different then. All the entertainers, all the big shots ate in the staff dining room then. It was a great job. He loved it. He played golf every day. And my mother liked being a waitress too. My mother liked it. She went to the Pines later on. My father went to Kutcher's. He worked at the Pines for a little bit as an assistant maitre d' for Bernie Cove. And then he went to Kutcher's, I think in 63, and he was there for at least 25 years. That's where he's best known as maitre d' at Kutcher's. And all over, wherever I go, all over, people know him and people like him. People still tell me. I get emails and I get letters, I get messages, how much they like my father. He was great, and my mother too. And it's so my mother mainly worked at the Concord, then she worked at the Pines as forever in the dining room. My father worked in the dining rooms, but our life centered from my earliest years to the Concord. The Concord in the early days, I'm saying this, the 50s and that was a real community. Everybody around here, my next door neighbor was Chick Kaiser and Cookie, who ran the drugstore on the other side. Irving Cohn was up the street. McCormick's, all the people were right here, and it was a real family neighborhood. And I would go to the Concord all the time and play there and do all that. So as a local kid, the Concord was my life then. Then my father went to Kutcher's, 63. Then I started working as a busboy when I was about, I'm 71. So I started working there when I was like 14 or 15 or whatever, as a busboy. And I worked there every weekend, pretty much. I didn't want to. My father made me. Every time I come home, I say, please, I don't want to work this weekend. I'd come home from school Friday. I have to work. Somebody didn't show up. So, okay. And I made a lot of money, like Lynn said. I made way more money than I needed. It was great. People made a lot of money in those days. And but it was hard. I just get that across. It was so hard, that job. The guests were just absolutely miserable. That's in my memory. Everybody says, oh, they're wonderful. They were so difficult. Nothing was hot enough. Nothing was cold enough. Nothing was quick enough. Whoever was, you went to an 8-seater and somebody complained who got served last. Somebody has to be last. It was just so hard. The guests were hard. The rest of the staff was always fighting with you too, like Marvin was saying, stealing this, stealing that. I mean, it was really cutthroat, especially with the professional guys and the guys from the city. And when I first started working at Kutcher's, it was all college kids, but later on, they couldn't get college kids. Americans didn't want to work in the hotels. They had to get other people to work there. But everybody made a lot of money there. So I worked at Kutcher's as a waiter, and what Marvin was saying, what Lynn was saying, it was hard. It was all day, but you did make a lot of money. And also, let me tell you this too. I was a horrible waiter. I was the worst. I mean, I couldn't remember anything. Oh my God, how do you remember this stuff? You get there and they're talking about extra stuff. I threw away so much stuff. It was a nightmare. I didn't know how to do it. I still, to this day, it's my nightmare, working in that, getting buried, going in there. And the kitchen, they would kill you in the kitchen. You kidding? Like Lynn said, oh my God, no matter who you were, it was terrible. It was a constant struggle and a constant war. At least that's my memory of it now. I mean, I like the other guys I worked with, and I mean, the kids from the city were just miserable. These spoiled little kids from Long Island or whatever. So it was terrible. I did that, and I did it as a waiter. I did that till I was in my early 20s, but it was always hard. But my mother loved it. And my mother loved being a waitress. She worked at the Pines till she didn't have to work there. She worked there till the late 70s, at least early 80s. But she liked it. That was her whole social life. She worked weekends. She went there, and she was a fabulous waitress. Wow, she carried a ton of stuff, remembered everything. But it's too hard. My father, as the maitre d' at Kutcher's, that was a great job too, because he liked that sports oriented, golf. He met great guys there. I liked his friend, the Kutcher's. It was a great atmosphere over there. But there are many local kids. I saw Phil Horowitz. There are many local kids worked at the hotels growing up. I think everybody did one way or another, and it was just part of our life. It was very difficult and tricky, but it was, wherever I go in the world, anywhere in the world, people know the Catskills. And it'll be somebody who knew my father somehow indirectly, worked for him, his name, so on the menu, whatever. So, I mean, wherever you go, and still, I don't know, things are passing now, it's a lot of years. But I mean, I meet people all over. The Catskills had such a profound effect on American culture. It's, all the comedians, entertainers, besides that, just the way to work, the whole dining room thing. All right, Marvin, did I rattle on enough, or you want me to keep going?
No, that's fine, Alan. Let's let Myron speak. I only want to mention to some people who heard you say it, but may not have registered. When a person in the Catskills says, I'm buried, that means they're up to their ears in alligators and somebody tossed them in more water. When you were in the dining room and everybody walked in at once, you had 40 guests and they were all screaming and yelling. And as Alan said, it was too well done. It wasn't well done enough.
Absolutely.
And you just you raise your hands and you say, God help me, and you do the best you can. The other expression that we all learned is 86. If you didn't have tuna and you don't go into the dining room and you say, hey, we got no more tuna in the kitchen, everybody's going to ask for tuna. So the big story was you yell out 86 tuna and everybody knows what that means and the guests don't know what you're talking about and nobody says, hey, give me a tuna sandwich. So you learn some of the jargon, but Alan, thank you for that. Let's give Myron a chance to chat. Go ahead.
I was such a terrible waiter, and I knew my father stuck me with the teens all the time, which was great. You know, they were not demanding and they were pretty tricky kids, and didn't make as much money as the rest of them. But he always gladly put me with them, and that was, you know, like when you go around the table, how do you want your roast beef? Medium rare? I got everybody mediums. I all the time. I know
Of course. If you could remember, you would say yours is medium, yours is rare, yours is well, but it was all the same.
Oh, the same.
Absolutely. It wasn't exactly gourmet dining, but it was good. You know the old line, the food's terrible and such small portions.
Right.
Myron, tell us your story.
Well, hello, do you hear me? I'm not on.
Yes.
Okay. Because I'm not, okay, there we go. Yeah, hi, my name is Myron Gittell. I started the Concord in 1964, and Brooklyn, I'm from Brooklyn. I was 19, Brooklyn was disintegrating, Crown Heights was, you know, just coming apart, all different kinds of people were coming in. And I'd been around, I'd been to Alaska, I was in the service already, and I'd gotten, well, kicked out of 2 colleges or I didn't finish the first year. So the mountains always beckoned if you were from the city. Other people started much earlier, even 14 or 15 coming up. But actually I worked at the Commodore when I was about 15 or 16, visiting friends up here. They were working there, I visited, and there was an opening. So I worked there for about a week or 2 at the Commodore in Swan Lake. There was also a Commodore in Thompsonville. So the Concord, it was, well, I mean, my first experience, you come there, they were like kind of, if not nasty, not so nice to the newcomers. Regardless, nothing personal, but that was it. They don't want you to feel too comfortable. So I'm in the dining room my second day, and my waiter, I'm a busboy, I had been training for a day, and he asked me, my waiter says, so there were some people coming late for dinner. And he says, could you get me 2 chopped liver for the couple? So I said, sure. Now the dining room, the kitchen was huge and there were so many counters to pick different things. So I say, where do I pick up chopped liver? So someone points to a big counter. I'm waiting. I say for 2 chopped livers. The guy says, okay, just be a few minutes. I'm waiting. People picking up desserts there. And then after a while, the chopped liver counter, the appet was somewhere else altogether. But everyone just kind of continued the charade because I was a newcomer and a greenhorn, and he'll have to learn his, he'll have to learn like everybody else and take the hard licks. Just unnecessary. And you wait, you're so long in there, you go back and you know everyone's waiting and your waiter is thinking, what took you 10 minutes? So it was a little horror. But Marvin said, I was at 5 from 64 to 71, but professional is like a very flexible term. Now I was there 5 years, but there were people there 10, 20, and you know, like you were talking before about different hierarchies. Well, there were many different, and some was about how long you were there, some how well you got along with certain management people. But certainly it was refreshing for the college kids to come in, and they worked hard, but a lot of them, I mean, they worked, as Alan said, so hard, but they had connections. Some are in the Concord and many of the hotels, you had to have connections. to work and to work. And many of those people came from the summer kids, from wealthy families, seasoned guests at the hotels. But I don't think it would happen now to work the most nitty gritty kind of work and lived in such nitty gritty quarters. And yet they came from of the most wealthy families that came to the Concord. So that was, I found that's interesting. Also, I worked 6 years there. I worked in Florida at the Sea Ranch Hotel in Lauderdale by the sea, and the Crown Hotel in Miami. But no one had the food policy like the hotel, the Borscht Belt, where you could literally, like I say, one for the table. It was almost, at least at the bigger hotels, there was no eyes. There was someone, there was a steward, but it was too much and they couldn't do it. So everyone was just ordering whatever they wanted, as much as they wanted for themselves and for the table. Like every dish, they were heavy, was like a heartbreak, a weight. But the people did it, and the waiters, they knew that's how you could increase your tip, and it did. And even the busboys, they would kind of recommend things, so people would even, sometimes the food wasn't that exotic, but sometimes they had exotic names for the different dishes. So that made them feel, and kind of with an international flavor. When I went, the Concord was starting to get convention, but they didn't have, the convention business grew as a regular guest, that's kind of played out over time. But I saw Arthur Winerick, so, the Concord was known for its singles weekends. So the first single weekend, October 64, and I see what the ratio, there was like 6 women to 2 guys at an 8-seater. It was, and that was kind of the norm, some kind of ratio like that. Many more women than men. I'm in dining room 3, a bar dining room, and I see this little rumpled man comes over, and he's looking around, and he talks to some of the singles, and the next thing I know, he's sitting down. And I go back into the kitchen, bring some dishes in. I come back about 10 minutes later. He's got champagne at the table. So I'm thinking, what a single scene. This is a guy in his 70s, rumpled, and he sees all the women, and he's making a move. But it wasn't so. That was Arthur Winerick, the founder and the owner. He was walking around checking out the guests and seeing how they were doing. And he saw how satisfied or not satisfied they were. So he made conversation. And I heard, Mr. Winerick, that's how I knew it was. And he ordered champagne to try to, make them have a more enjoyable time there, because it looks like they weren't. So he really had that personal touch. And I saw it in some other instances. As time went on, he died later that year, the convention became such a big part of it that the management, not that they didn't care about the regular guests, but the convention machas and the season's guests, those are the more important people to cater to and to be aware of what was going on. Hold on one second. So we talk about food. You can't not talk about food. And, you had the high holy holidays, the Jewish holidays. With Yom Kippur is supposed to be a fast. And I know at home you would fast till sundown, but the fast in the hotels, they had a buffet during the day when everyone is supposed to fast. But if with Jewish, life is important. So why should you fast if you have a medical condition? So if you had a medical condition, you didn't have to fast. That was kind of the unwritten rules. So now what middle class person or Jew doesn't have a medical condition? So they were feasting, and this we didn't work it. So from the non-Jewish help that were working the Yom Kippur Day, they were in droves, and one after the other, and like a free buffet, and fasting wasn't an issue, even if they were diabetic. Then they would come for 2 suppers. You had a dairy supper to break the fast, and then you had a meat supper like an hour after that. It was, so my whole concept of, doing penance and repenting and all that, and not, it was totally blown away by seeing, I don't want to call it gluttony, but I will, of so much that happened. Now, speaking about gluttony, a couple of years later, I was on the ambulance corps in Monticello in the 70s, and the hotels, a lot of calls, and one was at the Concord, my former home, and we get there, the crew, and it was called as Old Man Down and like a rush, and we get there, the guy's on the floor, unconscious, not alert, and it looks like, a full CPR, and the person said, we said, well, what happened? This is Passover, this is the first Passover, or the second Seder. He had 5 gefilte fish and he dropped to the floor. So yeah, overeating could be a problem. Now, Lynn talks about the Raleigh. I was there a little later at the Raleigh, and yeah, the Concord, you didn't schmear, there were no tips to the maitre d', you got your station based upon a lot of things, but you didn't tip. But other hotels, yes. So at the Raleigh, I started working there about 71, and they come around. I worked there a week. It was good. It wasn't so crazy like the Concord, and you could give more attention, and you could make more money there if it was busy than at the Concord. So they come around. Oh, do you want to give something? It's Mr. Babbitt. Babbitt was his birthday. So Sunday when you had money, so yeah, what the hell? I said, how much did they give him? $10. Okay. 2 weeks later, the assistant maitre d' a birthday. So, I forget. Okay. And about a month later, a different birthday, that was it. I mean, I gave my 10, I gave another 10 the next time. And, I don't know if you would have gotten a better station or not, but I didn't want much better station. I was doing fine. So, and there was a bust years later around at the Givers, because it's illegal to take money.
Right.
And I forgot the particular criminal infraction, but it was a bust at the Givers Hotel somewhere in the 70s of the maitre d' taking money. I don't know what the disposition of it was, but the hotels certainly, they got that reputation, but it really was happening often, I don't want to say everywhere, at the smaller hotels. Now, we talk about how much money we make, and yes, it was amazing, but we don't talk about the flip side of that, which could be gambling. Now, gambling was, you had the racetrack and the Concord, you had 2 games, you had some games right in the staff quarters, you had other games, and people, big games, now you had 100, the dining room, the Concord, it's seated, the tight capacity could be 3,500. So on a busy weekend, or the busiest, you could have 80 or 90 waiters, if not more, and half that amount of busboys. It was just amazing. Concord, each busboy had 2 waiter stations. At the Raleigh, one busboy just served 1, so it really varied. But you made money, and once you found the action, now there was different interpretation of what's action. The card games at the hotel, at the Concord, there were 2 games going on at people's homes close to the Concord, Sunday when checkout, and also Wednesdays when you had your check. And they could be all-nighters. You could win or lose $300, $400, $500. And if you won, it was great, as long as then you didn't go to the racetrack to then, make your donation back. So there was many people leaving their homes. Teddy, I forget, the name will come to me. Not many, but people blew them all, had a wife, kids, family, couldn't make the mortgage payments, and they blew it and they left their car payments. There was Shylock right in the, without mentioning name, in the Concord dining room. And, you know, they could always find you because they knew on Sunday you got paid. So, you know, there was kind of loose loaning practices because they always knew where to find you. Unless you paid a Rocky Grasso, one of the waiters, good guy, great waiter,
Yeah.
gambling habit or more than a habit. And and he was jammed up to the eyeballs, as we say. And the word was a desperado. There's gamblers and then you're a desperado, like nothing else matters. So Rocky, you know, you have your people on the weekend, and it happened once in a while, you become friendly with them. So he asked, could they tip him on Monday morning because he had to take care of some debts. So they did. They tipped him his whole station, or everyone, or most everyone, like 30 people. And that he got tipped on Sunday morning, check out his Sunday afternoon by and large. And that's when the Shylocks and the bookies and know where to find you. And how could you say I don't have any money? Well, he never came in for lunch. He left and he came back a couple of years later. He was a Pennsylvania guy. So it made you do just, not made you do, and people could have been there for years and never gambled. But it was, that's
Myron.
one of the, yes.
Myron, thank you. Let's take a pause and we're going to stop and ask questions in a minute. Two things I
Okay.
wanted to mention that have been touched upon by others. Myron mentioned Passover. Passover was such a long service that inevitably somebody was going to pass out. They're standing there with a cup of wine for an hour and a half, and how many times you drink it based on the Haggadah. Inevitably, somebody was going to pass out, hopefully not more serious. The guys in the dining room would put money in a pot, and the first person who passed out on your station, you got the pot. The second thing is there was no crime. There was virtually no crime. We had a policeman at the Delano. I cannot think of a single instance when someone was robbed, when someone had something taken from a room, when someone was approached about money. The kids slept in the hotel rooms and they had what they called night patrol. The parents left and went to the nightclub for the show at 10 o'clock, and they left the kids in the rooms with the doors open. And the camp counselors would do night patrol. They had a list of every room where there was a youngster, and they would go and check on those rooms, and virtually never was there an instance. And if there was, where a youngster got up and was crying or upset, you would hear in the nightclub, Mrs. Bernstein, please go to your room. Your son is crying. But in terms of crime, a car being stolen, any kind of hold up, any kind of anything, virtually, at least in our place in the 50s and 60s, never. I think we got a flavor from our panelists of what it was like in the dining room and in an extended world in which we lived. If you have questions, would you raise your hand, literally show it to me, I'm going to try and see you. Or if you want, there's a button you can touch under more where you can hit chat and say your name and that you have a question. I'm sure there are some questions. Does somebody have the first question? If so, you have to unmute your microphone so you can ask it. Okay, I see Joseph Friedman. Could you unmute, Joe?
I can
Jonathan,
unmute
can
him.
you unmute everybody? Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
There
We'll get,
were two
thank you.
things-
Go ahead, Joe.
When I worked in hotels, there were two things that impressed me, and I wonder what your experience was. One is the short order, many of the short order cooks, in my memory, were not English. A lot of them were Hispanic, and you'd go into the dining room and you'd shout your orders, and no one wrote anything down, but everything got done. So a lot of the they were very skilled. In the kitchen, there was a definite hierarchy. I worked for a waiter who got into a fight with one of the people in the kitchen. I don't know whether it was the pastry chef or the salad man. He was fired immediately. Because I suppose
Yes, because
they could always get another
easier.
waiter, get another professional.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You know, you mentioned hierarchy. I said that I learned the phenomenon of hierarchy. We had two bellhops at the Delano. One was the captain, and he had to tell the other guy what to do. From two bellhops, you had to have a hierarchy of who's in charge and who's going to tell what to do. In terms of the kitchen, you're absolutely right. The reason why it worked as well as it did is there was no mistakes. If you make a mistake and you get the wrong order, you throw it out, you give the right order. There was plenty of food around, plenty of things to do. If you brought something to the dining room to the person, they said, that's not it. Someone else would say, oh, I'll take that dish. Go bring her another one. We're not going to waste it. So everybody was fine. Thank you for your question. Anybody else have a question? Raise your hand. I'll see if I can find you. Alan Frischman.
Oh,
Wait 1 second. Alan, can you unmute? Jonathan, can you give Alan Frischman? Go ahead, Alan.
Well, you can hear me
loud.
now. Okay, I was
Yes.
wondering if I could use some of the information because some of the stories are pretty cute for my second book. I'm hoping you'd all agree to that. And I just wanted to share a different story that a waiter had told me that he was working in Grossinger's, and there was a woman there that really had too much to drink, and he was studying to be an EMT. And what happened was she got so drunk she slid under the table. So they ran over to get this guy, and they slid the table away so he could work on the woman. But a woman was eating her gefilte fish. She would not stop eating. As they slid the table away, it was more important for her to finish eating than to work on this person that passed out. So it must have been so many crazy experiences that happened in the dining room, besides the kitchen, but in the dining room with the customers. I just wanted to share that as a funny moment. And I just hope that you'll all share your stories with me in print.
Well, I'm fine with that, Al. We could talk afterwards. Ronnie Singer, did you have a question? I see you. Let's see if we can get you unmuted. Hold on. Jonathan, can you see Ronnie Singer up there? Yep, go ahead, Ronnie.
Hey,
Yeah, speak loud.
question. But Alan, I worked for your father in 1965 and 1966.
Oh, did you? Okay.
He was a real class act, but the thing that I remember most about him, the tennis courts at Kutcher's Country Club were pretty much near the staff quarters. And just about every day, your father would play tennis with Red Auerbach, who was the athletic director at the time.
Yeah.
And they would scream, they would yell at each other, and but he was a wonderful man working for your father. Jeff was the captain at that time. I don't know.
Wow. Okay. Oh, sure. Yeah, I worked there too then. I was in high school, so I worked. Those were classic times. It was, all the sports people were there. It was,
Yeah. And Lynn, I was one of the guys that chased people if they didn't tip them up. Especially, you know who it was? It was a lot of Canadians who tipped a little differently than people from the United States. So instead of somebody giving you, let's say, $20 a couple, which was a nice tip, obviously, they would maybe give you $5 a couple. And many times, I mean, not many times, but once or twice, they said they were going to report me to the maitre d', who was Alan's father at the time. So what he would say to the people is, that boy will be off the floor tonight. But it was Sunday when everybody left the hotel anyway.
Yeah.
So it never really happened. But he was a great guy, your father, Alan.
Yeah, he was. Thanks. Yeah, I get lots of comments from people about this, did that. I mean, he's a character like they all were, but yeah.
Anyway.
Bob Goodman, question? You're on mute. Go.
He doesn't have audio.
I don't
It's
hear
not
you.
showing audio.
Bob, we don't have your audio. Can't hear you. Other questions? Anybody else for another question? Raise your hand.
Marvin,
Well,
Ed Wolfson has
I
his
see.
hand. Ed Wolfson.
Ed Wolfson and then Beth Buchler. Okay. Can you find Ed Wolfson, Jonathan?
I've sent the message to unmute. It hasn't unmuted yet. It's
Okay, how about Beth Buchler on the letter screen? Alan Kaufman, I'll get you next. Beth, Hudson Cooper, I see that too.
You have
Hudson
to
and Alan.
unmute me.
Go ahead, Beth.
Am I unmuted?
Beth,
Yes.
Okay,
yes, you are.
you had to unmute me. Does anybody remember this guy? He was a chef at the Concord and Grossinger's for a while, and then he opened a restaurant in Monticello called Paul's Potpourri.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
Paul, on Lanfield
Yes.
Avenue. Yeah.
Some of you remember him?
On Lanfield
Yes.
Avenue.
Yes, yes, this was my
It was
father.
a tiny little place. Yep.
Yeah, tiny
We do.
little, very, very crowded place. I
We
thought
did
he was
too.
the only chef that threw plates. He once threw an omelet at the wall.
Very
Uh,
good. Thank you. Hudson, you want to try find Hudson?
Ed Wolfson is unmuted now.
Ed Wolfson.
ahead, Ed.
Ed, why don't you go now? We'll get Hudson.
Okay, thank you. Nobody mentioned Brown's Hotel. I spent 4 years at the Browns. Now that I'm in my 70s, late 70s, I know why everybody ordered hot water and lemon in the morning. You hear me? Yes,
Yeah.
hot water.
Yes,
and
we
lemon.
can.
Thank you. Hot water
You
and
got
lemon in the morning. We stayed in a place called the Lake Lodge. It was right between the cesspool and a stagnant lake. But we had our friends. We had 5 people. We knew each other. And so we come back every summer and we call ourselves the Miracle 5. And we do a lot of things. We'd have actually, nobody mentioned the roast pork on garlic bread. Everybody must have had the roast pork on garlic
Herbie's.
at Herbie's.
Herbie's in
Right?
Loch Sheldrick. Yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
in Loch Sheldrick, right. And we had one crime there. You didn't mention also there was a relief waiter. So if you had to take a day off, you had to pay the relief waiter to take your place. So otherwise,
Yes.
of course, so we paid him, but and we all get paid on Sundays, everybody knows. But what are you going to do with that money until you can go to the post office on Monday? So they had to find, place to hide your money. Well, this guy his name was from Miami. They used to call him Miami Shammy. And he went in there and he stole people's money. And so I was sleeping and I heard a great deal of noise at the Lake Lodge. And there was Izzy Stieglitz, who had a tattoo on his arm from the camps. And they caught Miami Shammy with the money. So I didn't know what they were going to do, if they were going to beat him up, if they were going to tie him up, But that was the only, the only crime that we saw there. And
Thank you.
well, like orange juice, people wanted fresh orange juice. We go to the orange machine and get the juice and take a little pulp and throw it on the top. So they would think this is fresh
Exactly.
orange
You get a
juice.
pit. You get a
But the
Get
pit.
a pit.
Thank you, Ed.
Right.
Thank you, Ed. Let
But the
me
worst-
see if anybody else has a question. Hold on, Ed. Somebody has a phone call going on. It's a little bit of interference. I have Hudson Cooper and Alan Kaufman. If you can find them, Jonathan, I'd appreciate it.
I've sent the message to Hudson Coopers to unmute.
Hudson, unmute. Speak.
Can you hear me?
Hudson, go. Yes.
I started out at a small hotel in Greenfield Park called the Grand Mountain Hotel. And the chef was a Filipino guy that had a machete under his belt all day long. And if you brought a plate back because it wasn't properly prepared, he would take the machete out and call you a goddamn hippie bastard. He hated all of us because we were in college. Years later, my folks moved up to Kiamisha. My dad became the department chairman at the high school for the business department. And they moved to a house in Kiamisha Lake, where I am right now. And we used to be able to see the Concord from upstairs. when I was, my dad pulled some strings because in the summertime, he was a maitre d' at the outdoor dining room near the pool, pulled some strings and got me as a waiter in the main dining room of the Concord. And I remember two stories. Number one, Gordon Winerick, Alan Winerick's, I guess, nephew, used to walk the catwalk above the kitchen and with a megaphone. And if you saw something you didn't like, if you took a bowl of soup without a monkey dish, you would hear, "Hey, hey, you!" And you'd look up, it was like God talking. It was Gordon Winerick yelling at you. The other thing, we made a lot of money during the conventions. I went to school in Binghamton. It was only 90 miles away, so I was able to come back on weekends for the police convention, the fireman convention. They used to drink a lot. They'd come in drunk at the tables, and they tipped very well. And the funny thing was the Jewish holidays, we couldn't be in the dining room during the services, but we would look through the glass porthole of the swinging doors. All the men had white yarmulkes on. And when they were davening, I said to my friend, it looks like the waves at Coney Island. But we made a lot of money. We had a great time. Fortunately, because my folks lived about half a mile away across the lake, I didn't have to put up with the lodging for the wait staff. I was able to come home for lunch, and it was a great time, and I miss it. And it's not the same anymore, but the memories are still there. And thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Hudson. Alan Kaufman, while Jonathan is unmuting you, you mentioned monkey dishes. That was the test. If a guy came in and said, I have experience in the mountains, my grandfather said, okay, go in there and get a monkey dish. And if the guy looked around like he didn't know what he was talking about, he threw him out the door. So that's the secret. Alan, go ahead.
Hi.
Alan Kaufman.
So I made the rounds with a few hotels. I worked in Green Acres. I worked in the Aladdin. I actually left the Aladdin as a waiter. Alan Barrish's dad was kind enough to take me in as a relief busboy mid-season. The following year, I came back as a busboy, and then ultimately I became I had the house station as a waiter. And I remember that the privilege that came along with that and being a Jewish kid from the Bronx is that on Saturdays, we used to get recruited to make sure that they had a minion. So we had to leave the dining room to satisfy the minion requirement, and then came back to a full station and had to scramble around to try and get everybody served. So I don't know if anybody else had experienced that, but you know, every hotel had its side jobs. This was a little bit of a strange one.
Very good. Thank you, Alan. I know I never did it, but I know at our hotel, the family table was not the favorite station. Everybody was worried about who's going to yell at them for what. But if they were good at what they did, and my grandfather and the rest of the family approved, then they could do no wrong. And so it was a double-edged sword. Are there other questions that I'm not seeing or comments? If you can keep them brief too.
Marvin, I see
Lynn or
Bob Goodman.
Alan, go ahead.
No, Bob Goodman.
Say it again. Bob Glickman?
Goodman.
We'll see if we can find you.
Did you find him?
Can you hear me through the phone?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Anybody remember the term speculating?
Oh,
Yes.
In the
Yes,
dining room?
Yeah.
yes.
You try and guess what people were going to order, and you loaded up your server.
Yeah.
Make sure,
Yes, you
especially
did.
on steak night.
Marvin, like I mentioned, there's some great stuff written, especially in the last 20 years on the Catskills. Phil Brown, I don't know if you all know him, he, Catskill Institute runs, in his book, Catskill Culture, has a lot. When I read his book and I look at that, I'm amazed at how much he remembers and how much he got right. And he got all the right. You know, Myron with gambling, Bill Graham, the rock impresario, not the religious guy, has a lot in his biography on gambling. He was a big gambler up here. And yeah, gambling with, I remember my uncle who came up here, he worked all summer, lost all
You're
his money.
breaking up a little bit, Al.
Okay, yeah.
You're breaking up a little bit, Alan.
Okay, I was just gonna say.
Let me, I see a hand from Lynn's iPad. Can you, Jonathan, unmute Lynn's iPad? I don't know what Lynn's last name is.
Cantor.
Go ahead.
Cantor.
We can hear
Hi,
you.
can you hear me?
Okay, we can hear you. Lynn.
Yes.
Yes,
Hi,
we
everyone.
can.
So I worked in a number of places, but one was the Stevensville, I was like 17. I was from the Bronx. I came up 2 summers to make money to go to Europe before my last semester at Hunter College. And I always thought, but this proves me wrong, I always thought I was the only Jewish girl crazy enough to do this kind of work. But now I see I wasn't. But anyway, when I worked at the Stevensville, I guess for $15 a week, I paid for my own room. I was very fancy. I didn't want to live in the monkey house or whatever they called it. So I stayed at George's Motel. I don't know if anyone remembers in Swan Lake, there was a place called George's Motel, and there was an antique
There's
shop
only
on
one.
the bottom. Farginza. What?
Yeah. Yes.
Anyway.
Yes.
And then we'd go down to Kilcoyne's at night. Then there was a bar down Kilcoyne's down the road. And the only thing I want to say is when I bought a little cabin up here 20 years ago, and I was driving around and I went to Swan Lake, and it was year 2000, and it looked exactly the same as it did in 1963. And Kilcoyne's was still open. I went in there, I remember the wooden phone booth. I mean, it was crazy. Time had stood still. And I have lots more stories, but I know my time is limited. So thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Lynn, for those that don't know, Kilcoyne's was a little bar in Swan Lake, and the fellow who ran it was a magician. And when you walked in, you would sit at the bar, and he would ask you to pick a card out of the deck, and you put it back in the deck, and then he literally threw the deck across the room completely, and one card stuck on the wall, which when you turned it over was your card. He went to magician shows in Chicago, in Cleveland, in San Francisco. He was a fabulous magician, and he had great burgers and, as I recall, clams, on the half shell. Okay, are there other questions? Again, if we could keep them brief, it's much appreciated. I know people mentioned Laurel's and a few other hotels, which we didn't mention. We weren't trying to cover the gamut of all the hotels that were here. By the way, there were once 500 different places in Sullivan County, and tens of thousands of people came up here. The terrible news is, as everybody knows, there's not a single one left except perhaps the Villa Roma, which really wasn't here in the heyday of the Catskills and the Borscht Belt. Kutcher's hung on the longest, probably. The Raleigh is still here. It's not open. It's an Orthodox place. It's still there. It's still being run as far as I know, although this summer I'm not sure. But otherwise, virtually every other hotel, for one reason or another, has gone out of business. Any other questions? Oh, okay. My cousin Phil is on there. Cousin Phil. He asked if we remember Kaplan's. Well, you can join if you like. I worked at Kaplan's after my grandparents' hotel burned down in 1968. That is the same, and it is totally, totally different. Kaplan's, as most of you know, was probably the craziest, busiest deli, not just in Monticello, but for 100 miles in all directions. I say that even though I married Denise Morantz from the Schwartz family, and Schwartz's was down the block a little bit. Kaplan's was an adventure in and of itself. I had a split shift, which means I worked from lunch from 12 to 3, and then I was off until 6, and then you work from 6 to closing. And Kaplan's was so busy in the late 60s that when the racetrack broke, we had standing room only and a line outside the door. And you literally didn't get finished until you cleaned every ketchup bottle and every salt shaker. And we would leave 2 in the morning sometimes, but it was extremely busy. It was a wonderful way to make a living. Phil, do you have anything to add? Our Aunt Ann Kaplan, she rest in peace, ran the place and did a fabulous job with Uncle Mo for, better part of 40 years. And as most of you know, if you came in and you gave them a banner from a college they didn't have, you got a midget salami. So the whole walls and all the ceiling was with banners hanging from all the schools. Somebody else, Barry, did you have a question? Barry Zisser, are you okay? No, all right. Other questions, anybody else who hasn't spoken yet? I don't see any hands up. Anybody on the phone? I don't know how you can communicate. You can text me if you want. Anybody else? We're past our hour that we allotted. We can finish up. And Lynn, did you have any closing comments?
No, I just wanted to mention one other thing that was such a mainstay of the hotel. When you work breakfast, which at the Concord and the Raleigh was, I think, started at 8:30 in the morning, always you would have a few old guys come in. They'd order some baked herring or some pickled herring, and then they would give you a few dollars. They would have you clean up their space, and then they would come back in about 9:30 with their wives, and she would say, "He'll have Wheatina." Not having known that he was in, or maybe she did know that he was in, but the amount of food was mind-boggling. And I think Alan touched on this. The amount of waste was also mind-boggling. And by today's standard, I mean, you could feed the homeless on things we speculated with. You know, if there was strudel for dessert on Friday night, and you went in and you got as many strudels as you could carry on your tray so that you had it, and you knew that the person, the next server over, was going to steal 4 of them from you. But the amount of food at the end of the day we threw away was mind-boggling. Absolutely.
Alan, any closing comments? Unmute.
No, it's good. No, it's, I would like to hear more people's stories about the hotels and their experience at the hotels. It's good hearing their stories. So maybe someday we can have a format where everybody could join in. But we've done
so maybe we should say that if anybody communicates with the library, wants to tell us anything, they'll forward it to Lynn and myself and Alan and Myron. And we'll certainly keep it in mind. We may do another one of these, and we welcome input, but reminder that there are 30 to 40 Catskill Borscht stories on the website, on the YouTube site as well, for the library. And this will, if you're that interested, this will be on the YouTube site tomorrow, I think, and you can send the link to friends and family who may have missed it. Myron, any closing comments?
No, just, I worked at one kosher hotel in Miami talking about the abundance of food. It was the Crown, about 40th Street in Collins. It wasn't, and this was maybe 70, 71, and it wasn't so crazy with the food. There was a checker who was a family, and what you ordered is what you took out. And, informally heard from other people, it wasn't like up here, the food in the kosher hotels down there, where it was just no.
You mentioned the hotels down there. My grandfather went to Florida every winter and hired a lot of the help that we had in the summer, because the help went down and worked on Miami Beach in the winter. So whether it was Wolfies or Pumpernicks or any of those, Haddon Hall, of course, was owned by the Kutcher family. So their people wintered there and summered at Kutcher's. So a lot of the people that worked at our hotels did work in the Miami Beach area. I myself, from, I would say maybe 2 or 3 years old until I was about 10, we went down every winter to Miami Beach, where my father managed different hotels on the beach. And I went to what was then known as South Beach Elementary School, which is no longer there because the causeway came in. And we literally could walk to Joe Stone Crab. I don't know if it was there, but we were that close to the beach where it ended. And all through the hotels on Collins Avenue and Washington Avenue were Catskills guests. They met in the winter, they saw one another from the summers, they got back together, and they sometimes rented rooms at the same hotels and carried on the way they did in the winter. So maybe that's an appropriate way to wrap it up. It was a cycle. A lot of good people and a lot of wonderful people came here and provided us with the sustenance that some of us had for decades in the business. It was a different culture than we have now. We remember it fondly and with affection. I thank everybody for joining us on this call. We had over 100 people, and we will do it again if people are interested. And in the meantime, be safe and be well. And as we say in the Catskills, sei gesund. See you next time.
Thank you, Marvin.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan.
Sure.
I think we did well for the first time of a big one like that.
Oh,
Good job. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
take care, Lynn.
Thank you. Good night. Great job. Thanks.
How do I shut this off?